They called her worthless until a billionaire bought her for a coin and made her his heiress. She was mocked, humiliated, and thrown onto a stage as nothing more than a cruel joke. The whole town laughed, calling her worthless. But then out of the silence a billionaire stepped forward with a single coin. One coin, to buy her freedom. One coin, to change her entire life. Suddenly, the woman everyone rejected is being trained to inherit a fortune, run an empire, and carry a legacy. But whispers of greed and betrayal rise around her, and dark secrets threaten to destroy everything she's been given. What happens when the woman they called worthless becomes the most powerful figure in town? And when lies spread faster than truth, will she rise to prove her worth, or lose it all? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the town square, where wooden folding chairs creaked under the weight of eager spectators. The annual charity auction had drawn nearly everyone in town, their faces flushed with excitement and cruel anticipation. Colorful banners fluttered overhead, a cheerful facade that masked the meanness brewing below. Julia Moore stood at the edge of the crowd, her thin shoulders hunched beneath her faded blue dress. Years of scrubbing other people's floors had left her hands rough and her spirit even rougher. She tried to make herself invisible, a skill she'd perfected since her family had turned their backs on her years ago. And now, folks, the auctioneer's voice boomed through his megaphone. For something special, two young men suddenly grabbed Julia's arms, dragging her forward through the crowd. Her heart hammered against her ribs as they pushed her onto the wooden platform. "How about this fine specimen?" The auctioneer's voice dripped with mockery. "A genuine town fixture. Barely used, might need some polishing." The crowd roared with laughter. Julia's cheeks burned as red as the setting Sunday. She kept her eyes fixed on her worn shoes, unable to meet the sea of smirking faces before her. The wooden platform felt like it might swallow her whole, and part of her wished it would. "Do I hear $5? The auctioneer called out. $3? Come on, folks, surely she's worth something." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone threw a penny that clinked and rolled across the platform. Earlier items had sold quickly. Mrs. Henderson's apple pies for $20 each. Old Mr. Peterson's hand-carved chairs for $50. Even dusty knickknacks from forgotten attics had found eager buyers. But now, the silence between jeers felt like stones dropping on Julia's shoulders. Well, a deep voice cut through the cruel laughter. The crowd parted like curtains, revealing a tall figure in an impeccably tailored gray suit. River Westcott's silver hair caught the sunlight as he made his way forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. The whispers started instantly. Everyone knew of the reclusive billionaire, but few had seen him in person. His rare appearances in town were usually connected to some grand charitable gesture that left people talking for months. River reached into his pocket and withdrew something that glinted in the sun. A single silver coin, old and worn, but beautifully preserved. Without a word, he placed it in the auctioneer's trembling hand. "Mr. Westcott," the auctioneer stammered, all his previous bravado vanishing. "Surely, you don't mean to." "I do." River's voice was firm, but gentle. "And I want everyone here to understand exactly what this purchase means." He turned to address the now silent crowd. "Miss Moore will be my heiress in training, effective immediately." Julia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. She searched River's face for any sign of mockery, but found only kindness in his steady gaze. The crowd's stunned silence was broken only by scattered gasps and urgent whispers. The same people who had been laughing moments before now stood frozen. Their entertainment turned to shock. The afternoon heat seemed to press down even harder as the reality of River's announcement sank in. Julia's hands trembled at her sides as she struggled to process what was happening. The word heiress echoed in her mind like a foreign language she couldn't quite understand. River extended his hand toward her, offering assistance as she stepped down from the platform on shaking legs. The crowd's whispers grew louder, filling the square with a buzz of confusion and disbelief. The cruel joke they'd planned had transformed into something none of them had expected, least of all Julia herself. River's hand on Julia's elbow was gentle but firm as he guided her through the parting crowd. The touch felt foreign to her. It had been years since anyone had shown her such courtesy. Every step away from the auction platform felt like walking through a dream, her legs wobbly beneath her. The townspeople's faces blurred together as they passed, their whispers creating a symphony of speculation. Some wore expressions of shock, others of envy, and a few showed genuine shame for their earlier cruelty. Julia kept her eyes downcast, a habit born from years of avoiding hostile stares. A sleek black car waited at the edge of the square, its polished surface reflecting the late afternoon Sunday. The driver, wearing a crisp uniform, opened the rear door with practiced efficiency. Julia hesitated, her worn shoes suddenly feeling out of place near such luxury. "It's all right," River said softly, his voice carrying none of the mockery she'd grown accustomed to. "Please, get in." The leather seat was cool against her back, and Julia found herself perched on the edge, afraid to lean back fully. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap as River settled beside her. The car pulled away, smoothly, leaving the murmuring crowd behind. "I imagine you have questions," River said after a moment of silence. Julia nodded, but couldn't find her voice. Her throat felt tight with unshed tears, whether from relief or fear, she wasn't sure. River reached into his pocket and withdrew the silver coin he'd used to purchase her. In the car's interior light, Julia could see intricate engravings on its surface, worn smooth in places from years of handling. "This was Margaret's, my late wife's, lucky charm," he explained, turning the coin between his fingers. "She carried it everywhere, said it reminded her that value isn't always obvious at first glance." He smiled softly at the memory. "When I saw what they were doing to you today, I knew exactly how to use it." Julia's trembling fingers reached out hesitantly when he offered her the coin. "But why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because, Julia Moore, I see worth where this town sees weakness. I see potential where they see poverty. And most importantly, I see a heart that hasn't been corrupted by cruelty, despite experiencing so much of it." The car turned onto a tree-lined drive that wound through manicured grounds. Julia's eyes widened as River's estate came into view, a sprawling mansion that seemed to touch the darkening sky. Warm lights glowed from dozens of windows, and the setting sun painted the stone walls in shades of gold. A housekeeper met them at the door, her gentle smile putting Julia slightly at ease. "This is Mrs. Chen," River introduced. "She'll show you to your room. Please make yourself comfortable. This is your home now." Julia followed Mrs. Chen up a grand staircase, her hand trailing along the smooth wooden banister. Each step took her further from the life she'd known, yet somehow closer to something she'd never dared to dream about. The guest room, her room now, was larger than her entire rented shack. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, while floor to ceiling windows offered a view of the gardens below. The carpet was thick beneath her feet, and a sitting area near the fireplace looked more comfortable than anything she'd ever owned. "Dinner will be served in 1 hour," Mrs. Chen said kindly. "There are fresh clothes in the closet if you'd like to change." Left alone, Julia sank to her knees beside the bed. "Lord," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I don't understand what's happening. Is this real? Is this a crueler trick than before?" Her prayers mixed with confused tears as she tried to make sense of the day's events. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her, and she fell asleep atop the softest blankets she'd ever felt. Meanwhile, in his study, River Westcott sat behind his massive desk, a heavy folder labeled "Will and Testament" open before him. A cough rattled his chest, and he quickly pressed a handkerchief to his mouth. When he pulled it away, his expression remained stoic despite the telltale stains that spoke of his limited time. The morning sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, casting gentle patterns across Julia's face. The unfamiliar softness of the bed made her blink in confusion, until memories of yesterday flooded back. But it was the aroma drifting up from downstairs that truly roused her, the unmistakable smell of crispy bacon and fresh-baked biscuits. Julia dressed quickly in clothes she found laid out for her, simple but new, making her old garments seem even shabbier in comparison. Her footsteps were hesitant as she descended the grand staircase, following the inviting breakfast smells to a sunny kitchen. "Good morning, dear." A warm voice greeted her. Mrs. Gaines, River's longtime housekeeper, stood at the stove, her gray hair neatly pinned back and her apron spotless. "I hope you slept well. Come, sit down and have some breakfast." Before Julia could protest, Mrs. Gaines was steering her toward a chair at the kitchen table. I can help cook, Julia offered quietly, unused to being served. Nonsense, Mrs. Gaines said firmly, but kindly. Today you're our guest. There'll be plenty of time for helping later if you wish. She set down a plate piled with golden biscuits, crispy bacon, and scrambled eggs that made Julia's mouth water despite her nervousness. As Julia ate tentatively, Mrs. Gaines bustled around the kitchen, humming softly. The normalcy of the scene almost made Julia forget where she was, until she remembered this wasn't her place. She shouldn't be here, eating this fine breakfast, in this beautiful kitchen. Rising quickly, Julia began edging toward the door. Thank you for breakfast, but I should go. I don't belong. Mr. Westcott would like to see you in his study. Mrs. Gaines interrupted gently, as if she'd been expecting this reaction. Down the hall, third door on the right, Julia found River in a book-lined study, sunlight streaming through tall windows. He looked up from his desk with a warm smile that eased some of her tension. Good morning, Julia. Please, sit down. He gestured to a leather chair across from him. I imagine you're wondering what happens next. Julia perched on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. River leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. I have a proposition for you, he began. I'd like you to shadow me, learn how my businesses operate. You'll receive a salary, of course, and proper training. The ultimate goal is for you to run my charitable foundation. Julia's mouth fell open in shock. But I don't know anything about business. I clean houses. You have something more valuable than business knowledge, integrity, and compassion. Those can't be taught, the rest can be learned. Tears welled in Julia's eyes as she shook her head. Sir, you don't understand. People like me don't. Don't what? Don't deserve second chances, don't have the capacity to learn and grow. River's voice was gentle but firm. The papers in front of you are initial training documents. All you need to do is sign. Julia stared at the papers through blur of tears, her hand shaking as she picked up the pen. Her signature looked out of place on the crisp documents, but River smiled as though she'd just signed a masterpiece. That evening, River's car pulled up in front of Julia's tiny rental house on the poor side of town. Neighbors peered through windows and whispered on porches as Julia quickly gathered her meager belongings into a single worn bag. The house looked even smaller now, its peeling paint and crooked steps more obvious than ever. Julia stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the place that had been her home for the past 3 years. It wasn't much, but it had been safe, familiar. Back in the car, Julia clutched her small bag close, watching the familiar streets slip away. Fear still coursed through her veins, fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of hope itself. But underneath that fear, like a tiny flower pushing through concrete, was something new, the smallest seed of hope, taking root despite her best efforts to resist it. Julia woke before sunrise on her first full day at River's estate, her stomach tight with nerves. The grandeur of her room still felt foreign, the silk curtains, plush carpet, and mahogany furniture a stark contrast to her usual surroundings. She dressed carefully in the new clothes provided, smoothing her hands over the fabric repeatedly to calm herself. At precisely 8 o'clock, she met River in the mansion's formal dining room. The table was set with multiple forks, spoons, and glasses that made Julia's head spin. River noticed her overwhelmed expression and smiled kindly. We'll start with the basics, he said, demonstrating proper posture and the correct use of each utensil. Julia mimicked his movements, face burning when she dropped a spoon with a loud clatter. But River's patience never wavered as he guided her through each lesson. Later that morning, they moved to his office for bookkeeping instruction. Mark will help you learn our computer systems, River explained as his assistant entered the room. Mark Halstead was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, his dark hair perfectly styled. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he regarded Julia. Of course, sir, Mark said smoothly. But the moment River stepped out, his demeanor changed. I suppose you've never even used a proper computer before, he asked, voice dripping with disdain. Julia's cheeks flushed. I used one at the library sometimes. Mark sighed dramatically. Well, try to keep up. I don't have time to explain everything twice. He rushed through basic functions, speaking in technical terms Julia struggled to understand. Her fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard, and each mistake drew a subtle eye roll from Mark. Despite her frustration, Julia persevered, carefully taking notes and practicing when Mark wasn't watching. By lunchtime, she had managed to grasp the fundamental navigation of the accounting software. River joined her for lunch in the garden conservatory, where sunlight streamed through glass walls onto potted plants and climbing vines. But the beautiful setting couldn't soften the weight of his next words. "Julia, there's something you need to know," River said quietly, setting down his fork. "I'm ill. Terminal cancer. The doctors give me less than a year." The words hit Julia like a physical blow. She stared at him, unable to process what she'd heard. But that's impossible. You can't. That's why I needed to find someone quickly." River continued gently, "Someone with the right heart to carry on my work." "No," Julia whispered, pushing back from the table. "I can't. I'm nobody. I'll fail you. I'll ruin everything you've built." Tears spilled down her cheeks as years of internalized worthlessness surfaced. River waited patiently for her tears to slow before speaking again. "Come with me. There's somewhere I'd like to show you." He led her across the grounds to a small stone chapel, its stained glass windows casting colored light across wooden pews. River sat down, patting the space beside him. "When my wife died, I spent countless hours here," he said softly. "Faith carried me through the darkest times. It reminded me that we're all part of a greater purpose." Julia remained silent, her hands twisted in her lap. She'd stopped believing in purpose long ago, when family and life had turned their backs on her. River bowed his head in prayer, his whispered words echoing in the quiet space. That night, Julia lay in her bed, staring at the ornate ceiling. River's revelation weighed heavily on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The magnitude of what he was asking, what he believed she could become, seemed impossible. Sleep eluded her as doubts and fears chased each other through her mind, the chapel's stained glass patterns dancing behind her closed eyes. Monday morning arrived with a chill that matched Julia's nerves. She stood before the mirror in her room, fidgeting with the simple navy dress she'd chosen. Even though it was new, she felt plain next to the designer suits she knew awaited her at the board meeting. River's car glided through morning traffic toward the gleaming Westcott Industries building downtown. Julia's hands trembled as she clutched her notepad, her only shield against what lay ahead. "Just observe today," River said kindly, as they rode the elevator to the top floor. "You're here to learn, nothing more." The boardroom doors opened to reveal 12 executives seated around a polished table. Their expressions ranged from puzzled to openly dismissive as Julia followed River inside. She caught whispers behind manicured hands and saw several eye rolls as she took her seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," River announced, "this is Julia Moore. She'll be joining us as my personal trainee." A woman in an expensive red suit barely concealed her snicker. "Trainee for what exactly?" she asked, her tone sharp with disdain. "For running my charitable foundation," River replied firmly. "Miss Moore has exactly the perspective and heart this company needs." Throughout the meeting, Julia felt every judgmental stare. When she accidentally knocked over her water glass, the snickers grew louder. She tried to take notes, but her handwriting looked childish next to the sleek laptops surrounding her. One executive, a gray-haired man with gold cufflinks, openly scoffed when Julia asked a question about profit margins. "Perhaps we should stick to simpler topics," he suggested, drawing more subtle laughter. River's voice cut through the mockery. "That's actually an excellent question, Julia. The social impact of our profit structure is precisely what you'll need to understand." The moment they left the boardroom, Julia's composure crumbled. In the privacy of River's office, tears spilled down her cheeks. "I made such a fool of myself," she whispered. "They all think I'm a joke." "No," River said gently. "They're the foolish ones, measuring worth by designer labels and Ivy League degrees. Your humility is your strength, Julia. You see people, not numbers." But the day's trials weren't over. Back at the estate, Mrs. Gaines met them with worried eyes. "The phone's been ringing all morning," she said. "The town gossips are having a field day." Julia's heart sank as Mrs. Gaines reluctantly shared what people were saying. Gold digger, manipulator, trash trying to climb the social ladder. All the old cruel words had resurfaced, with new venom behind them. That evening, Julia stood in her room, throwing clothes into her small bag. Tears blurred her vision as she packed, convinced she should return to her old life before she brought more shame to River's name. Going somewhere? River's quiet voice startled her. I can't stay. Julia choked out. Everyone's right. I don't belong here. I'll only embarrass you more. River crossed the room and gently took the bag from her hands. They called you worthless, he said softly. I call you chosen. Julia's hands trembled as she reached for the silver coin she now wore on a chain around her neck. River's wife's lucky charm. The token that had changed her life at the auction. Her fingers traced its worn surface, feeling the weight of River's belief in her. Slowly, she unpacked her bag, each item a small victory over the voices that had told her to run. The silver coin caught the evening light as she placed it on her nightstand, no longer just a symbol of her purchase, but of her choice to stay and fight for this new path, no matter how fragile it felt. The morning sun streamed through tall windows as Julia settled at her new desk in River's home office. Before her lay a stack of manila folders, each containing applications for the Westcott Foundation's Housing Assistance Program. Her heart quickened at the responsibility River had entrusted to her. Take your time with each one, River had instructed. Look beyond the numbers to the stories they tell. Julia opened the first folder with careful hands. Inside, she found a single mother's plea for help with rent, her words desperate, but dignified. 3 children, 2 jobs, and still falling behind. Julia's throat tightened as she recognized the woman's struggle. It mirrored her own past. She began writing detailed notes in her careful handwriting. Applicant shows remarkable resilience. Children's education prioritized despite hardship. Current rental situation unstable. Her comments filled the margins, noting not just financial details but the human elements other reviewers might miss. Mrs. Gaines brought her tea mid-morning, pausing to read over Julia's shoulder. You have a gift for seeing people's hearts, she said warmly, straightening papers on the desk. That's something no business school can teach. Throughout the day, Mrs. Gaines would stop by, offering gentle guidance on formatting reports and using the computer system. She showed Julia how to organize her thoughts more clearly, but never dismissed the emotional insights that made Julia's evaluations unique. Don't let anyone tell you compassion has no place in business, Mrs. Gaines advised, her eyes kind. River chose you because you understand what these families are going through. As afternoon faded into evening, Julia remained at her desk, surrounded by business manuals River had provided. The thick volumes intimidated her, but she was determined to learn. She practiced typing on the computer, her fingers slowly gaining confidence on the keyboard. Your voice matters, Mrs. Gaines reminded her over dinner. Those notes you're writing, they're helping River see these applications in a new light. Julia worked late into the night, thunder rumbling outside as rain lashed the windows. The desk lamp cast a warm circle around her as she pored over terms like debt-to-income ratio and sustainable housing initiatives. Her eyes grew heavy, but she pressed on, wanting to prove worthy of River's trust. The business terminology swam before her eyes as exhaustion set in. She told herself just 5 more minutes, then 5 more. The steady drumming of rain against the windows grew distant as her head slowly lowered to rest on her arms. She didn't hear River's quiet footsteps as he entered the study well past midnight. He paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of Julia asleep at her desk, surrounded by carefully annotated applications and dog-eared business guides. Moving softly across the room, River lifted a warm blanket from the study's reading chair. With gentle hands, he draped it over Julia's shoulders, careful not to wake her. Her notes caught his eye, pages filled with insights that went far beyond mere financial assessments, showing an understanding of human struggle and resilience that touched him deeply. A small smile crossed River's face as he dimmed the desk lamp. In Julia's dedication, in her natural empathy and growing confidence, he saw hope for the Foundation's future. Here was someone who would carry forward not just his business legacy, but the heart of his mission to help others. Thunder rolled again outside, but Julia slept peacefully under the blanket, her work spread before her, a testament to how far she had already come from that day in the town square. In the soft lamplight, surrounded by the tools of her new purpose, she looked finally at home. Julia stood before the mirror in her room, smoothing down the simple navy dress River had insisted on buying her for the luncheon. Her fingers trembled as she fastened a modest pearl necklace, Another gift she felt unworthy of wearing. The local leader's luncheon at the Grand Hotel loomed ahead like a mountain she wasn't equipped to climb. "Remember, you're representing the Westcott Foundation now," River said kindly as they drove downtown in his black car. "Just be yourself." The Grand Hotel's crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as Julia followed River into the ballroom. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each setting perfect with gleaming silverware. Julia's heart pounded as faces turned to stare. "Mr. Westcott, welcome." The mayor's wife approached, her smile bright, but her eyes measuring Julia with barely concealed curiosity. "And this must be your protégé?" Julia managed a wobbly smile, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am, Julia Moore." Through the appetizer course, Julia pushed salmon around her plate, trying to remember which fork to use. The conversation swirled around her, talk of property values and business deals that made her head spin. She felt every sideways glance, every whispered comment. Then Sarah Matthews, a farmer's wife seated beside her, spoke up. "Our barn roof collapsed last winter," she said quietly. "Between medical bills for my Jimmy's asthma and feed costs rising, we just can't catch up." The raw pain in Sarah's voice cut through Julia's anxiety. This was something she understood. The weight of watching bills pile up, of lying awake wondering how to make ends meet. "It must be so hard," Julia said softly, turning to face Sarah fully. "Watching your little boy struggle to breathe, while everything else falls apart around you." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "Yes, exactly that. Nobody seems to understand." "I do," Julia replied, reaching over to squeeze Sarah's hand. "When you're choosing between medicine and meals, every day feels like climbing a mountain." The table had grown quiet, listening to their exchange. Julia spoke from her heart about hope and persistence, sharing without shame how she'd once stretched a single can of soup into 3 meals. River watched from across the table, a proud smile touching his lips as he saw the other guests leaning in, nodding with new respect as Julia spoke. Her natural empathy had transformed the stuffy luncheon into something genuine. Later, as they walked through the hotel's garden, River paused by a fountain. "You have something money can't buy, Julia," he said thoughtfully. "A heart that truly sees people. That's more powerful than any fortune." Julia looked down at her sensible shoes, fighting back tears. "I just understood her pain, that's all." "That's everything," River corrected gently. "You connected with her soul to soul. That's why I chose you." That evening, Julia stood taller as she changed for dinner. She picked out a blouse with a touch of color, no longer hiding in shapeless grays. Though whispers of worthless still echoed in her mind, they seemed fainter now, competing with new voices, Sarah's grateful thanks, River's words of praise. In her room that night, Julia lit a single candle and opened the journal River had given her. Her pen moved slowly but surely across the page. "Today I helped someone feel less alone. Maybe that's what I'm meant to do. Maybe I can be more than what they said. Maybe I can be more." The candlelight flickered across the words as Julia sat back, letting herself believe, just a little, in possibilities she'd never dared imagine before. Crystal glasses clinked, and soft music drifted through River's grand ballroom as Julia smoothed her dark green silk dress, a far cry from the shabby clothes she'd worn at the charity auction months ago. The estate sparkled with hundreds of tiny lights, transforming the familiar rooms into something magical. "Welcome to the Westcott Foundation's annual charity dinner," Julia heard herself saying to guests, amazed at how steady her voice remained. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she guided people to their tables. Mrs. Peterson, who had once refused to let Julia clean her house, curled her lip. "Well, isn't this quite the transformation?" she sneered. From cleaning rags to silk. Julia swallowed hard but kept her smile. "Would you like to see our display of current charitable projects?" she asked softly. Across the room, River watched with quiet pride as Julia navigated the crowd. Despite the whispers and sideways glances, she held her head high, explaining foundation initiatives to interested guests. When River stood to make his toast, the room hushed. "Friends," he said, his voice carrying clearly, "I'd like to introduce the future of the Westcott Foundation, my chosen heiress, Julia Moore." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Julia felt her cheeks flush as all eyes turned to her. Some guests broke into genuine applause, while others exchanged dark looks. Later, as Julia passed the library, she heard Mark's voice, dripping with disdain. "She'll ruin everything River built," he whispered to a board member. "Just watch, street trash can't handle real responsibility." The words hit Julia like physical blows. After the guests departed, she found River in his study, tears threatening to spill. "I heard Mark tonight," she confessed. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I'll disappoint you." River's eyes softened. "Julia, true loyalty shows itself in trials," he said gently. "Those who stand by us in storms reveal their hearts. Those who whisper in shadows reveal theirs too." Julia sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, her hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. 12 Foundation staff members watched her, their expressions ranging from skeptical to curious. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's review the summer grant proposals." As the meeting progressed, Julia found her rhythm. She listened intently to each presentation, asking thoughtful questions about community impact. When disagreements arose about funding allocation, she mediated with the compassionate wisdom she'd learned from River. "Mrs. Moore," Sarah from accounting spoke up, "your suggestion to split the education grant between both schools actually makes perfect sense. I hadn't considered that approach." A warm feeling of accomplishment spread through Julia's chest as she noticed heads nodding in agreement. Even Mark's usual frown had softened slightly. The meeting's success was short-lived. A crash from River's study sent Julia running down the hallway. She found him slumped over his desk, papers scattered around him. "River," she rushed to his side, helping him sit up. His face was pale, his breathing labored. "Just a spell," he whispered, but Julia could see the toll his illness was taking. She helped him to his leather chair, her heart aching at how frail he felt. As evening approached, River insisted on showing Julia something special. In his study, he opened an old photo album. "This is Margaret," he said softly, pointing to a photograph of an elegant woman with kind eyes. "My wife had such dreams for this foundation." Julia touched the photographs gently, seeing the love in their faces, the hope in their eyes. "She looked so happy." "She was," River nodded. "And she would have approved of you, Julia. You have the same heart for people." Tears welled in Julia's eyes as she understood the weight of River's trust. "I promise," she whispered, "I'll honor what you and Margaret built. I won't let either of you down." The setting sun painted the study in warm golden light as they continued looking through the memories, each page strengthening Julia's resolve to carry their legacy forward. The grand ballroom of River's estate sparkled with crystal chandeliers and elegant decorations. Hundreds of guests in their finest attire mingled beneath the golden lights, their jewelry catching every glimmer. Julia stood before her mirror as Mrs. Gaines helped adjust her midnight blue evening gown. "You look beautiful, dear," the housekeeper said, pinning a pearl brooch to Julia's shoulder. "Remember, you earned your place here." Her hands trembling slightly, Julia approached the podium. The microphone seemed to loom before her as she gazed out at the sea of faces. Taking a deep breath, she began. "1 year ago, I stood in a town square, believing I was worthless." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "But one person saw dignity in me, when no one else did. Tonight, I stand before you because second chances are real, and every human being deserves to be valued." The silence in the room was absolute as she continued, sharing stories of lives transformed through the foundation's work. When she finished, the applause was deafening. Tears gleamed in many eyes, and several donors approached her with warm handshakes and congratulations. River made his way to the stage, his pride evident despite his weakened state. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the hushed room, "Julia Moore is not just my heiress, she is my greatest legacy. She embodies everything this foundation stands for." In the midst of the celebration, no one noticed Mark slip away to his office. With practiced hands, he pulled out carefully forged documents from his briefcase, a cold smile playing on his lips as he sealed them in an envelope addressed to the local newspaper. The next morning, Julia's "World Shattered" splashed across the front page was the headline, "River's Ruin. Former house cleaner manipulates dying billionaire." Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, and outside, reporters gathered at the estate gates. She sat in her room, the newspaper crumpled in her lap, as the life she'd carefully built crashed down around her. The sharp knock of police at the estate's front door made Julia's heart skip. 2 officers entered, their faces stern as they pulled out notepads. Behind them, Mark stood with a concerned expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Moore, we need to ask you some questions about certain documents that have come to light," the taller officer said, placing a stack of papers on the mahogany table. Julia's hands shook as she looked at the forged signatures. The documents suggested she had pressured River during his weakest moments, manipulating him into naming her heir. Each page felt like a dagger to her heart. "This is preposterous." River's voice boomed from the doorway. Though he leaned heavily on his cane, his eyes blazed with anger. "Every decision I made was of sound mind and my own free will, but the damage was done." That afternoon, the board of directors sent an official letter suspending Julia's authority pending court proceedings. She watched helplessly as security escorted her from the foundation offices. Back in her room, Julia curled up on her bed, tears flowing freely. "They were right," she whispered into her pillow. "I'm nothing but worthless." The soft click of her door opening made her look up. River stood there, his face etched with concern. He crossed the room slowly and sat beside her. "Julia," he said gently, "your worth isn't measured by their lies. It's measured by truth and in God's eyes." He pressed the familiar silver coin into her palm, its surface warm against her skin. "Don't let them take who you are." The following days blurred together as Julia prepared for the hearing. Mr. Clark, River's lawyer, patiently guided her through what to expect, his kind eyes offering reassurance when her voice trembled. "Just speak your truth," he advised, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "The facts are on our side." Around town, Julia couldn't escape the whispers. Some folks crossed the street to avoid her, while others, like Mrs. Peterson from the bakery, pressed her hand and said, "We've seen how you've changed, dear. We believe in you." The morning of the trial arrived cold and gray. Julia's heart sank when Mrs. Gaines brought news that River was too weak to attend. "He's praying for you," the housekeeper whispered, straightening Julia's simple navy dress. Walking into the courthouse alone, Julia felt every eye upon her. Her legs wobbled as she made her way to the witness stand. Under questioning, she spoke softly but clearly about River's mentorship, her voice growing stronger as she described their work together. "Did you ever pressure Mr. Westcott?" the opposing lawyer demanded. "No, sir," Julia replied, maintaining her composure. "River saw worth in me when I couldn't see it myself. I would never betray that trust." Throughout her testimony, she noticed familiar faces in the crowd. Some wore scowls of disbelief, while others nodded encouragingly. The town seemed split, caught between old prejudices and the undeniable changes they'd witnessed in her. Mr. Clark was shuffling through papers when his eyes suddenly widened. "Wait," he said, pulling out a worn leather-bound book. This was in the Foundation archives, Mrs. Westcott's personal diary. Julia's hands trembled as she opened the delicate pages. Inside, dated 15 years ago, were entries in flowing handwriting. "River and I discussed our dream today. We'll find someone pure of heart but broken by life's cruelty. Someone who understands struggle. We'll mentor them to lead the foundation with compassion." The courtroom fell silent as Mr. Clark presented the diary. Entry after entry revealed River and late wife's careful plans to find an heir who knew hardship firsthand. The final entry, just before her death, read, "Remember, darling, look for the heart, not the polish." Mark's face turned ashen as handwriting experts confirmed the diary's authenticity. When they compared his forged signatures to River's genuine ones, the truth became clear. Before the judge could order his arrest, Mark bolted from the courthouse, leaving his briefcase behind. Julia's legs gave out, and she sank into her chair, tears of relief streaming down her face. The whispers in the courtroom turned from accusation to sympathy. That evening, she sat beside River's bed, holding his frail hand as she recounted everything. His eyes sparkled with pride as he whispered, "You were always the one, Julia. Margaret and I knew there would be someone like you someday." The changes in River became more noticeable with each passing day. His once steady hands now trembled when he tried to hold his cup, and his voice grew softer, barely above a whisper. Julia rarely left his side, spending her days in the cushioned chair next to his bed, reading from his worn leather Bible. "The Lord is my shepherd," she read softly, her voice steady despite the ache in her heart. "I shall not want." River's breathing had become labored, but his eyes remained bright, fixed on Julia as she read. During brief moments of strength, he would squeeze her hand, offering a weak smile that spoke volumes. One evening, as the setting sun painted the room in warm golden light, River beckoned Julia closer. His hands shook as he pressed a thick envelope into her palm. "My will," he whispered. "Everything, the foundation, all of it, it's yours now." His eyes filled with tears as he looked at her. "You're the daughter I never had, Julia." She held his hand tightly as his breathing slowed. With one final, peaceful exhale, River slipped away. Julia's tears fell silently as she pressed her forehead against his still hand, feeling the profound silence of the room. Though her heart ached, she felt a gentle peace, as if River's spirit lingered, wrapping her in invisible comfort. When morning came, the estate was eerily quiet. Mrs. Gaines moved through the halls with red-rimmed eyes, making phone calls and beginning the solemn preparations for River's funeral. 2 weeks after River's passing, the grand chapel on the estate grounds filled with mourners. Morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow shadows across the gathered faces, some familiar, some once hostile, all now united in remembrance. Julia stood at the podium, her black dress simple but elegant. Her hands no longer trembled as she gripped the wooden stand. "River saw worth in people others dismissed," she began, her voice clear and strong. "He taught me that every life has value, no matter how broken or forgotten." The same townsfolk who had once mocked her at the auction now sat in respectful silence. Julia continued, "Today, I'm announcing the creation of the River Westcott Second Chance Scholarship Fund for women who've been told they're worthless. Because no one is worthless in God's eyes." Applause filled the chapel, echoing off the high ceiling. Even those who had doubted her bowed their heads in acknowledgement. After the service, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and pink, Julia walked alone through River's favorite garden path. The silver coin felt warm in her palm as she held it up to the fading light. "Thank you," she whispered skyward, tears gleaming in her eyes but a smile on her face. She knew with certainty that her transformation from outcast to heiress was complete, and that River's legacy of compassion would continue through her work. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.